Check, check, check. Little buffer. And Baylor football is good again. And in the race for the Big 12 championship, what are the odds that they're able to get there? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Thursday. Welcome to Locked On Baylor, and thank you for making it your first listen every single day. Drake Toll from Sports Illustrated's Inside the Bears. John Garcia Jr., the director of recruiting at Sports Illustrated, covering all things college football from A to Z. And John, I see a little message written on the board today. Looks like it says 4 is enough. I know coincidentally 4 is the number of letters in the word love. Is this some kind of like passionate hidden message you have back there?
Look, it's the holiday season creeping up, end of the year. Everybody's reassessing, self-scouting, if you will.
Right.
So yeah, love should be enough, but certainly it's not for most relationships. It's only the foundation there. But of course, now this is a college football playoff nudge against the grain, if you will. I think, just look at this past weekend, right? Look at these upsets and how it felt in some of these games. You go to 12 and it doesn't feel that way anymore, though. Yeah. You know, the executives could care less.
Yeah, John, for Baylor, these upsets do nothing for this program because they are squarely out of any college football playoff or national conversation, which I think Baylor fans are used to over the course of time now, being that kind of underdog figure. And this team has gone from a point of losing to West Virginia on the road, like lowest of lows for this squad after losing to BYU and Oklahoma State, and now controlling their own destiny to go to the Big 12 championship. It feels like Baylor is good again. And I know you cover mostly the recruiting side, but you know these names, the Blake Shapins and the Richard Reeses and even the Gavin Holmes, who's like eight years into college football now. Yeah. This click for Baylor has been pretty dramatic. I don't know if we expected it. Is this something that you just feel as though Dave Aranda is kind of the catalyst in taking a team of young guys and turning them around fast?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, trying to defend this title from last year with a new group, right? And I think there's really no other way to place the roster that he's working with right now. But it's also, I think, kind of a microcosm of the Big 12. It's really good at the top. I mean, just look at the last few games Baylor's got lined up. I mean, it's all of the true contenders for the Big 12 crown. So it's all still TBD in terms of who's gonna wind up playing one another. So I think that's part of it as well. So you can't take any game beyond what it actually is, just one game, right? So West Virginia, worst team in the conference, whatever it is. Yeah, you thought, okay, maybe there's a quarterback change. What's going to happen going forward at Baylor to right the ship? And it turns out the answer was just tweaking things as opposed to overhauling. And I think that's the mark of a very good coach and one who understands what he has on his own roster. And since that point, Baylor's really looked and most importantly for us, felt like a very different team. I think even that Oklahoma game last week, it never really felt like Baylor was off balance. It felt like Baylor controlled just about every element of it. They ran the football, they possessed the football, they turned over Dylan Gabriel, which is really the singular formula to slow him down or slow OU down from an offensive standpoint. So they checked the boxes that you would have thought they needed to win the game. And it could have been worse, right? You know, Squirrel takes a knee there at the end or slides down as opposed to, running it in. And now all of a sudden Baylor's in the 40s and you're thinking of the previous era of the program. But overall, resounding resilience after the West Virginia deal. Now all of a sudden, combined with great effort and increased, I would say, offensive output and dedication to running the football, even though you did go with the more, the throwing quarterback to start the year, Baylor's right back where it wants to be. And the scheduling gods mixed in now give you a path towards, potentially defending your title or having the opportunity to defend that title there in the Big 12. So amazing, fascinating all around. I think the round robin in the Big 12 with that top half, right? TCU, Baylor, Texas, K-State, Kansas, OSU. That round robin between that group has just been fascinating to look at, just top down. And I think, being in the thick of it right now says a lot about your program, and Baylor's right in the thick of it, truly. So they should be included in that conversation, even though at one point, we thought maybe not so much. So I think this is just another feather in the cap for Dave Aranda, which I know I praise all the time every time I come on here, but he keeps kind of proving it, even when things
Yeah.
don't look like they're going to bounce back.
What's interesting to me, John, is that we came into this season expecting the Big 12 to have a ton of parity, to be that league where the conference champion may have 2 losses in conference play. And it has certainly lived up to that, as you see pretty much everybody squarely in that 2 or 3 spot with 2 or 3 losses. For those teams on the top half of the conference and the bottom half of the conference, there's parity everywhere. In the Pac-12, there's a lot less of that. You get parity in the back half, but you have your Utahs, your USCs, UCLA, and Oregon, who have cemented themselves not just in the top half of the Pac-12, but even in college football, top 15, top 20 teams. Is that the mark of a great conference? Or is it what the Big 12 has displayed with even Texas, who's got a lot of great upside, still having a couple of conference losses in there?
Yeah, I think it's more about parity overall, not necessarily the disparity from top to bottom. Now, if your top contenders are national title contenders,
Yeah.
it does change the vibe, right? So when you're talking SEC, for instance, yeah, Vanderbilt and Missouri and South Carolina this year, they're not going to come up as much. But man, Georgia's going to come up at the top, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU
Yeah.
now, Ole Miss, and it feels different when you talk about it. But beyond the national title footprint, I think parity is a great thing for a conference, especially when it's up in the air. So TCU is really the only one that has an opportunity to make it a college football playoff kind of deal, and they probably have to win out based on last week's initial college football playoff ranking.
Yeah.
So that's its own story, but I do think that the strength of a conference is its overall depth, not just its top end depth, because you can pull, like you just said, out of the Pac-12, pull the top 4 programs from any conference, and yeah, you're going to feel really good about that group. But what about that middle group, right? What about that,
Yeah.
4 through 8? I mean, to me, that's the group that has to be at least solid to where you can talk about the strength of your conference. Otherwise, it's just conference power X, like we see in the ACC, like we see, I would say, in the Big Ten, which has been somewhat surprising this year. And as you alluded to, we see it in the Pac-12 as well.
Yeah. John, before we get to the John's Thoughts portion of our show today, then hear from Dave Aranda on the back half, the decommitment and flip of Christian Brathwaite pretty dramatically and recently to LSU. Just a quick little, I'm done at Baylor, I'm going to LSU, is something that a lot of Baylor fans were scared of with the
Sure.
lack of success early in the year for Baylor. And I don't know if that was a true factor because LSU up until 2 weeks ago was kind of treading water. So this decommitment and flip to LSU on the one half is flattering. Baylor for a long time was not losing recruits to big time programs. On the other half, you now don't get Brathwaite. What does this do to Baylor's class?
Well, Baylor's class is strong and big and balanced, particularly
Yeah.
on defense. So I think you still have a group of front 7 players that are going to be able to come in and eventually contribute. Now, within that group, Braithwaite was one of the best of the bunch, right? A versatile linebacker who we've talked about here on this show, who looks and projects like that modern player who
Yeah.
can truly play 3 different positions on 3 different downs, and that's something that other programs began to recognize. And Christian himself, he said, look, I started getting a bunch of offers. He just didn't post them. Out of respect
Yeah.
for Aranda and Baylor, he wasn't posting every offer he was getting, including LSU. So it really wasn't until he decided to take the visit to Baton Rouge to where he said, let me do some due diligence. And look, he took the trip, SEC at night, all that stuff blown away. And he jumped on the hype train that right now is LSU at its apex. So it's understandable to that regard, right? They've got a freshman from Texas at linebacker in Harold Perkins who is setting the world on fire right now at LSU.
Yeah.
So selling him in that role, which Christian kind of fits, is something that was going to be hard to turn down. And I don't think it was anything Baylor did or didn't do within the recruitment. We know that they have continued to double down on their own recruits, right?
Mm.
Obviously, Austin Novosad poster child for that, but even other, lesser known prospects have had to hold off. Baylor has had to hold off other schools more privately. And I think that speaks to Aranda and the culture of what they want to recruit in a prospect. These kids aren't posting all the offers and pimping out the visits and all that kind of stuff. It's much more behind the scenes and private. So even when there is negative news like we saw, it's not this huge long buildup to where the fan base is asking about it every single week. it's much more business-like behind closed doors, which is something I know Aranda staff would appreciate all the same. But in terms of the class, still big, still in the top 25 overall, and you still got a heavy front seven
Yeah.
presence. And then linebacker-wise, I still like the group that's on board. And going right into what we talked about in terms of Baylor holding off other schools, Terry York, another Texan linebacker who's having a huge senior season, comparable, I would say, to Christian's. He says some of those schools are starting to slow down in his recruitment, right? And he's comfortable with that. He was just kind of surprised to a degree, but I think again that's sort of the respect that Baylor has both on the field and on the trail.
Yeah. Well, John, I know it's been a while. I think we say it every year, but this year feels specifically wild in college football, aside from your Georgia at the top that just doesn't care about anybody or anything. And I want to get your thoughts on not just last weekend's games, but a couple of the big ones coming up this weekend. But first, I'll tell everybody at home about Upside. And, we talk a lot about the big sponsors here at Locked On, and one that has been certainly practical and one that's a tangible example of how these have bettered my life since I started at Locked On is Upside, because inflation has hit us all, obviously, and everything's more expensive. I went and got sushi this morning, and my typical sushi order is like $8. It was $11.50. Like, I don't know why sushi went up $3.50. I think it's because of the crab inside the California roll, which is not really sushi, but there's a crab shortage. Like 2 billion crabs are missing in the Alaskan. That's not a river. It's like the ocean thing, Gulf, whatever. And so I'm paying more inflation of crab meat. But due to Upside, I get money back, which I use specifically at restaurants and specifically at grocery stores too, because as a college kid, I eat a lot. And if you get started today, use the Upside app with promo code Locked On and get 5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10. It's a free $5. Claim an offer, whatever you're buying on Upside. You check into that business, you pay as usual with your credit or debit card, and you get paid. In comparison to credit card companies, their rewards and loyalty programs, you can earn 3 times more with Upside. Upside users are earning more than $1 million a week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on the App Store as well. Download the free Upside app and get cash back on all of your purchases with the code LOCKED, LOCKED. Get $5 or more on your first purchase of $10. That is a free $5 at Upside. John, the fighting Tennessee Volunteers might not be as good as we thought they were, especially compared to the Georgia Bulldogs. And in a 12-team playoff, it just wouldn't have mattered. Both of these teams would still be going to the postseason. And LSU topples Alabama. Notre Dame blows out Clemson. Another wild week in college football. And like you mentioned, Baylor goes on the road, knock off Oklahoma, just the second time in program history they've done that. What did you learn on the top half of college football from this weekend's games?
Ironically, as we talk about the game modernizing, right? We talk about it on the field and recruiting and all those things. We talk about spread offenses, right? Throwing the football, pushing it down the field. These big, freaky, athletic quarterbacks. All the new in this great sport of football. Wasn't this weekend kind of a reminder of, hey, the line of scrimmage, defense, and kind of bringing it on that side still matters so much. I mean, Notre Dame beat up Clemson. Georgia beat up Tennessee, programs that are used to spreading it out and winning however they wanted. Georgia and Notre Dame kind of enforced their will. And we talked about it with Baylor, right? With that, I guess some would call that an upset. Same kind of thing. Defense, possessing the football, running the football. Now you're doing it more creatively, right? Jet sweeps and some of the fun stuff. But you're still, in principle, kind of going old school with how you are on the path towards winning. Ohio State had to win with defense last week. Michigan is there in the top 5 because of defense. So I think this weekend was kind of a reminder to me of, hey, it all goes back to those foundational principles. LSU's upset of Alabama, same kind of thing. Bryce Young was under pressure the entire night, and it was just a little bit too much for them to overcome. So I think, that was a good reminder just in the calendar and the craziness of college football that you can still, and probably you will probably have to win a couple games this way, even if you're Georgia, even if you're programs that can overwhelm your opponent from a talent perspective. It still sometimes comes back to defense and running the football, which is maybe why TCU is not getting the respect it deserves. As I try to connect these dots out loud. Oregon, same kind of deal, but it's still a very important part of the process. And I think when it comes to the Final Four that are going to be in there, I think they're going to have that defense, toughness, run the football mentality common between them.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, the Deuce Vaughns and Bijan Robinson, Richard Reese has thrown his name in that hat this season. Brees Hall, guys that are pretty recent in Big 12, that the running game in this conference has become so much better than it was 6, 7 years ago, where everybody was just launching it deep to the point where if
Yeah.
Oklahoma had the defense they have this season 7 years ago, they would have been fine. Nobody's running the ball against them anyway. Now they're the worst rushing defense in the Power Five, and that's where Baylor was able to exploit and get the win on Saturday thanks to Squirrel Williams having a big game. But I take a look at this weekend, and even in Big 12 play, where the biggest game really in the country is in TCU and Texas as they get College Game Day. What is it, John, that has made, if you even have an, because I don't really, that has made TCU such a good football team this season after many, myself included in the Big 12 media, had them picked in the bottom three of this league?
Yeah, see, that was the other route I was going to go with my surprises just of this season is the variance of these first year coaches,
Yeah.
right? You've got the high of TCU, Oregon, LSU, USC, all sitting there in the
Yeah.
top 10, and then you've got on the other side, Miami's awful. Florida has not looked the part. Some of these other first year coaches, Notre Dame, one of the biggest early season disappointments. So these transitions and the variance there is a story in and of itself. But I think with TCU it's this right combination of the offense with the personnel that was already in place. It was like you weren't trying to go in the opposite direction. I think when a lot of these coaching changes happen, we focus on kind of the human element, right? Well,
Yeah.
this guy was a defensive coach, so let's bring in the spread guy, right? Or vice versa. This guy was more of a running coach. Let's bring in the guy who's going to focus more on defense or whatever it is, trying to create the antithesis of what you just had. Well, TCU kind of went from strength to strength, right? So bringing in Sonny Dykes, who is known for more of the wide open offenses with some senior and veteran presence coming back, particularly on that side of the ball, led by Dugan. It was just kind of the perfect storm to where offensively they're going to be able to challenge you vertically and horizontally with a good run game and a quarterback who in and of itself could run the ball and challenge a defense and their discipline. And then defensively, it's like they're doing just enough. They're kind of the old school Big 12 defense where you're like, they're making plays, but it's not as consistent as you would like. Maybe it's more turnover driven than the conventional, hey, let's just make a stop on third down here and get the ball back. So it's maybe more advantageous, lucky, if you will. So you wonder if that can continue from TCU's perspective. But on the perceptional side, it's just like, man, they're just going to win every shootout that they get
Yeah.
into. And it might not matter how good or bad that defense is, but they are somewhat advantageous in turning over the football and making plays in the back end. I think their secondary is probably their best group defensively. And if you're willing to get into that type of game, it's like 7-on-7. They just need that one stop, and they're going to feel pretty good about coming out with the victory. But Texas will be, of course, a huge challenge for TCU. It's as balanced an offense as you're going to get in college football with, as you mentioned, with maybe the best running back in the country in Bijan Robinson. So obviously a huge game for the Big 12 and obviously nationally when you're talking about College Game Day and the hype that TCU has built. Now you've got to instead of being the darling, now you've got to prove it. You got to keep going with it, and that's what this time of year is all about.
Baylor's defense is founded on fundamental chaos. Jackers and robbers, as Dave Aranda says it. DCU's is just chaos. Fundamentals, sometimes. Mostly chaos, though. John, before we get you out of here, Baylor and Kansas State this weekend. If Baylor wins, they are now just one win. If they beat Kansas State and beat Texas, they're in the Big 12 championship without a doubt. So if they knock off this K-State team, there's a lot on the line for both of these squads. What have you seen this year out of Kansas State? Because they seem a little bipolar, and sometimes their injuries have benefited them, and other times they just, on the cutting room floor with some of these guys.
Yeah, like Adrian Martinez, if not for Bo Nix, would be like the unanimous comeback player of the year,
Yeah.
rebuild his career image kind of guy. But yeah, after the injury, you don't know, right? Because Walker Howard came in or Will Howard and just lit it up, from a passing perspective, which is not necessarily Martinez's game. So how do you deal with that as a coaching staff? I think that'll be fascinating from K-State's perspective. Obviously, Deuce Vaughn is a stud. K-State's always going to bring kind of like Baylor, right? A fundamental defense that you can't beat singularly, right? You're going to have to mix it up. You're going to have to keep them honest in order to do so. But I'm thinking going into this matchup, I'm looking at it just like most, I would imagine Baylor's defense against that K-State offense. And again, if you're both fundamentally old school, if you will, something's got to give there. So I think that's going to be a fun, exciting game. And I think the quarterback could have everything to do with it because one presents a more narrow game plan versus the other. So it's just a matter of how much do you want to put on Dave Aranda? If you make it simple for him, typically, you have to pay for that in the end. So I would be curious to see how K-State handles it.
Be a big one. Night game in Waco this weekend. First conference night game in a long time for Baylor. John, thanks for joining the show. As always, up next is Dave Aranda. But first, John, where can they find your work if the folks listening at home want to see it?
Of course, right here in Locked On. Catch us on Twitter as well, John Garcia _JR, and at Sports Illustrated at si.com/college.
John, pleasure as always.
Likewise, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah. And for those listening, coming up next is Dave Aranda. But first, everybody has heard about BetOnline. It is where the game starts. With college basketball back up and ready too, BetOnline is like the A1 place that I've gone to place my bets. I use Shot Quality. If you've ever seen Shot Quality, Simon Gersberg does a great job there. You go to betonline.net, and it is where you can find all your wagering needs. There's podcasts, there's news, there's just about everything you could. Look, it's like sports threw up on a page. So I use my mobile device. I go to BetOnline. I find everything that I want right there, and I can do a little wagering legally, by the way, some Monopoly money thrown out there, and make my way. Baylor basketball covered 44 points on Monday, which was really helpful, and they hit the over of 144, which was also helpful as well. So BetOnline's a great place to put your sports knowledge to the test. Go visit it today. Terms and conditions do apply. Now, Dave Aranda, what are your thoughts on the Oklahoma win and Kansas State coming up this Saturday?
It's good to see you guys. Excited for this week. It's good to be home. A lot of good things on the tape, but I think specifically defensively is a fair amount to improve on. So looking forward to doing that. Always impressed with Coach Kleiman and Kansas State. I think they play a game that I really respect. I know our staff does. Tough, physical. Defensively, their effort is outstanding. I think offensively, it's a smart attack. They look for matchups in the passing game, and in the running game, they look for angles and numbers. And so what a challenge we have in front of us. And, we've fully recognized where we're at and kind of what's at stake, and so excited to attack all of it. Take any questions you guys got.
Dave, you mentioned K-State and how impressed you are with them. I mean, when you look at the film, what really stands out the most?
Physicality, effort, toughness. And those are all things, as a coach, you want to be associated with. And so they're doing that now, And then I think in critical moments, in critical times, they're getting big plays by their people. And, they're doing a great job, I think, offensively. Impressed with their attack and just how they set people up and take advantage of angles and numbers. And in the throw game, they make the most with everything they got. And so a lot of times what's coming and they'll dress it up. And so there's just enough sleight of hand to where they're taking advantage of you with the speed and athleticism that they got. So it's impressive to see. They're playing well right now.
Adrian Martinez has played in a lot of college football games. What does that do for a team when they have that much experience under center?
No, I appreciate that. I think he feels empowered. I think when you see him open up, he has really, really good long speed, and so it's impressive to watch. And so we're going to do everything we can to not allow him to open up. And I think he's got good arm strength. I think his anticipation and his ability to throw guys open has improved as the season's gone on. And so I think him just coming back for this last one was real positive results, a lot of good things on tape. And so he's definitely a threat and someone we totally see.
Dave?
Coach, this past week was one of the few weeks that Richard wasn't the leading ball carrier, obviously dealing with those flu-like symptoms. But how good to field kind of have a committee? You talked about that a little bit last week, kind of a running back by committee in that backfield.
I appreciate that. I think, it's been a work in progress, and I think there's still a lot of areas to improve, specifically in that running back room. But you look from where we started to where we are now, a lot of improvement, and you give the credit to everyone in that room. I think Juice is included in that too, but you look at just Squirrel and his commitment and being down and getting back up countless numbers of times. You look at Richard and taking on all the load and the managing that load. You look at Quaylen and just his maturity and growth. I mean, you see all the emotion kind of coming out of him, and so it's a dude just kind of becoming right in front of you, and so just way cool. And we're going to need all of that and more for what we're about to try to do. So impressed with that room.
Dave, to build on Parker's question, has your running game reached a level where, whether it's Quaylen, whether it's Squirrel, whether it's Richard back there, you feel like you can be productive?
I think we're still working to get to that. That would be ideal. I appreciate that question. I think the opportunity to be that, I think, is really kind of, that's where you want to be. And I think to bring it back, I think that's where K-State is at times. I know they've got a real special running back, but some of those creases, those gaps, and the angles that they create, you could have a couple people back there running it, and so way impressed with them. And I think that's what you'd like to get to, is you'd like to get to where, the plan, the math is all worked out. The guys up front are owning the guys that they're against. And you can have someone take a 5-yard gain into a 15-yard gain, or a 15-yard gain to a 50-yard gain. And so we're hoping to get there. I feel like K-State's there.
Dave, how much do you feel like the flu impacted the team last week, and how much do you think that can linger here into this week?
Appreciate that. I thought that, we had guys that were battling through that, and it started off in a trickle, as all these things kind of normally do, and towards the end of the week, it kind of became a thing. A lot of those guys are back. A lot of times that's a day or two thing. And so as we stand right now, I think we're in good standing. But we probably were this time last week too, so we've got to continue to keep things clean, wash our hands, and just do all the stuff that we know we're supposed to be doing and probably need to do better.
Dave, what is it about this defense right now? And is it maybe the loss of guys like JT and Jalen and Terrell from last year that they've just been struggling, allowing a lot of points, and where do you improve from here?
I think I appreciate the question, the consistent approach throughout the week. I think it's being fierce with reality and not thinking that we or me or he is someone that they're not. So that's number one. And then number two is recognizing that life is hard and that things aren't given to you and that you have to work for things and sacrifice. And I think, I think all of those are kind of life lessons that, particularly on that side of it, we're still learning. And I think for us as coaches to try to model that and not weaponize that and use that as a teaching tool, always difficult when you're collecting and counting the wins and losses. But I think that's really what it is that. Because, it starts today. It starts on Monday.
That was Dave Aranda with the thoughts on the Kansas State game and a little bit on the Oklahoma win as well. Baylor, Kansas State, we'll be covering it tomorrow. Tomorrow's show will be a big one with Scotty Swingler, the Pigskin Preacher, as we talk the biggest matchup, certainly to this point, for Baylor this year, and how the Bears can defend the home turf at night. Because if they don't, their shot at a Big 12 championship is pretty dismal. So it is not win or go home exactly, but it's pretty darn close to it. If you got a shot, come on Saturday. Go to the game on Saturday. Be there. It is going to be a great atmosphere if Baylor fans choose to make it one, and they've got to for a night game against K-State. As for us at Locked On Baylor, by us, I mean myself, this has been, always will be, come back tomorrow for a little more recap of Baylor, Kansas State, or preview of Baylor, Kansas State. Locked On Baylor.